Some Missouri pediatricians are concerned an order from the president could lead to fewer childhood vaccinations. This as the Show Me State's vaccine rate has dropped. Hannah Falcon is breaking down what could change under this new executive order.
Every new parent knows the panic.
I, despite being a pediatrician, was a new mom and I researched everything. Diapers, formula, types of clothes, mattress types.
But there was one thing urgent care pediatrician Tweelan Pham did not panic about.
The one thing I didn't have to research and the one thing I didn't worry about was whether or not she was going to get vaccinated on time on an evidence-based schedule.
President Donald Trump signed an executive order this week aimed at reducing the number of recommended childhood vaccines and spacing out the schedule they're supposed to be given to kids. The White House says the order maximizes parental choice over vaccines and prioritizes disabilities and religious freedom. Dr. Pham is concerned the order will lead to lower vaccination rates, something Missouri is already struggling with as kindergarten vaccine rates drop below the 90% threshold needed to achieve herd immunity.
This means that kids who are at risk, who can't be vaccinated, or they have some type of immunocompromise that puts them at higher risk, are at risk for these schools.
However, the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services tells me despite the executive order, the vaccination requirements, availability, and insurance coverage in Missouri have not changed. Ultimately, the vaccination schedule for school children is up to state law, meaning it would take action from the state legislature to change that law here in Missouri. I asked Governor Mike Kehoe if he plans to change any laws to reflect the executive order, and he did not answer me today. Reporting in Jefferson City, I'm Hannah Falcon.